The total number of global cases of COVID-19 has passed 755,000, including more than 37,000 fatalities. Over 164,000 patients are reported to have recovered. The United States has tested more than 1 million people. Italy has seen a continuous decrease in new cases since March 26th. Spain has confirmed drastic rise in cases. The United Kingdom announces a plan to repatriate stranded Britons. Russia closed borders and placed Moscow into quarantine. The Olympics in Japan are now rescheduled for July 2021. Australia surpasses 4,000 cases. Zimbabwe enters a 21-day lockdown. It's day 1166 of our long national nightmare, Donald Trump's presidency. Today, after insulting a number of reporters, he said that coronavirus could lead to as much as 100 to 200,000 deaths in our country. And then he introduced the crazy right-wing Christian nutjob from MyPillow. No joking, he did.
To action which has empowered companies like MyPillow to help our nation win this invisible war. Now I wrote something off the cuff, if I can read this. Okay. God gave us grace on November 8, 2016 to change the course we were on. God had been taken out of our schools and lives. A nation had turned its back on God. And I encourage you to use this time at home to get back in the Word, read our Bibles, and spend time with our families. Our president gave us so much hope where just a few short months ago, we had the best economy, the lowest unemployment, and wages going up. It was amazing. With our great president, vice president, and this administration, and all the great people in this country praying daily, we will get through this and get back to a place that's stronger and safer than ever.
Please come on up. I did not know he was going to do that, but he's a friend of mine, and I do appreciate it. Thank you, Mike, very much.
Everything is completely under control. This is Stand Up. I'm Pete Dominick. It's Tuesday, March 31st. Well, hello, family, and thanks for tuning in to Stand Up here, where every day we talk about, every day now, 5 days a week, talk about the issues that matter to you, your family, your community, your planet. And it seems like there is nothing other than this pandemic that has us hiding in our homes, staying inside our own yards if you have one. Terrifying. No one knows what tomorrow is going to bring but more death and fear. And who would have thought we would have been here? Strange days, for sure. A lot of people using that phrase, strange days. And the kids are home. They're not in school. And so I thought we would talk about education for the entire episode. I have 4 awesome guests joining us, including Randi Weingarten, who is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. That's how big of a deal I am. That's what you're paying for if you're on Patreon, because I get the best guests here. All the guests you see on all the cable networks, they come talk to me. So thank you very much for your support. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. I am very excited that on Monday of this week, I got my 500th paid subscriber on Patreon. Jacqueline Hoover, whoever you are awesome. Thank you very much. A $50 subscription from Jacqueline, and I can't thank you enough. In these crazy, scary, unpredictable times, those of you supporting me and this podcast, which is every day trying to inform you with the best experts, fighting apathy and ignorance with a conversation with the people who know what the hell is going on every day. So I've got Randi Weingarten of American Federation of Teachers. I've got Andrew Spar of the Florida Educators Association and the AFL-CIO. Then I invited my friend and neighbor, Brendan King, who's a high school science teacher, and a listener named, well, we'll call her Elizabeth, who teaches in a school down in Louisiana. 4 guests, all teachers, educators who care deeply about the students and the schools, with different points of views and different situations and different schools and different settings, and a lot of information, great conversations with all of them. So thank you very much for supporting me on Patreon. Thank you very much for your rating and review. Let's get to the conversation with the guests. That's why you're here, for the experts. Let's get to it. Here now, my conversation with Randi Weingarten of the American Federation of Teachers. Okay, I've got Randi Weingarten now, and of course, Randi, I know you just were talking to some of the healthcare professionals and nurses. What is the update?
Yeah, so, for those who don't know, Pete, we are the fastest growing healthcare union, and it is, let me just say, not only are the nurses and the doctors, this is Dr. Day, and the other essential providers, not only they're heroes, but every single nurse, every single respiratory therapist, every single doctor who is going in to a hospital right now and helping sick COVID-19 patients know in the back of their mind that they're going to get sick, and they have gotten sick. And we owe them every single bit of protective equipment that we can find. This has to be the first priority, not Donald Trump's blathering about how great he is. This has to be the deployment of every single bit of the United States arsenal must go into protecting these doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists. And what's happening is it's not. And that's what I was hearing from all across the country today about how there are shortages of gowns and of masks and of all sorts of other equipment, not just obviously the ventilators and all sorts of other things. And, and worse or equally as bad, the lack of training when new people come in to actually help, and the fact that these hospital entities, some of them, not all of them, some of them have been very good, are actually retaliating against nurses who are going on to TV or talking about what the needs are. We heard examples just now about how there are administrators of hospitals who are walking around with masks, but they are refusing to let the nurses walk around with masks. And so I'm just, I'm just kind of taking in everything that I just heard for the last hour. But people are getting sick, and people like are you can see there are 2 hospitals I just talked to where we have our own members who are now on respirators because they are gotten sick because of the health the help and the treatment they were giving to others. And when somebody talks about being on respirators, that means they're very, very sick.
Right.
So, Trump yesterday said and accused doctors of taking this equipment. This equipment is absolutely imperative for these frontline workers to help save the rest of us. And so our union is doing everything in our power to try to get them these equipment, including yesterday writing a letter to the Chamber of Commerce, who evidently has been the obstacle to Trump using the Defense Production Act in a much more meaningful way. But we have to open those stockpiles, use the Defense Production Act, and the federal government needs to spend, that COVID task force needs to get millions of bits of these PPPs out to every state as quickly as possible.
So as of Monday afternoon, the 30th, there is still a real shortage of personal protection PPE supplies for frontline healthcare workers. That's what you're hearing.
Absolutely.
All over the country. All
over the country. But so take a place like New York. There are some hospitals that people are reusing their N95 masks. People are being told not to walk around with masks. Every single one of these nurses and healthcare providers need to walk around with masks all the time, not N95s, but surgical masks. They need to be protected. We have a lack of gowns, a lack of gloves, a lack of splash equipment. So, you see this all over the place. And so there are places that are worse than others. But one state told me that they had 60 of our members are sick right now in one of the states that we represent. I just heard story after story after story after story after story. And we need these nurses and healthcare providers to be telling these stories from the front lines instead of being told by their employers that if they tell a story like this, they're going to be they're going to be retaliated against.
Your organization, American Federation of Teachers, represents more than 112,000 healthcare professionals. Sometimes people don't know that.
Yeah, close to 200,000 who every single day are working in hospitals trying to save people's lives.
Well, there's so much more to talk about the frontline healthcare workers, but I also want to talk with you about educators and teachers.
Absolutely.
What was the most difficult reason or set of reasons that you had to close schools? Why was it so hard to have to close all of these schools, knowing that this virus was going to spread if you kept them open?
So, this is, again, and I don't mean to be so bashing of this particular administration, but take Betsy DeVos on Friday, who didn't even bother, that Secretary of Education, doesn't even bother putting out any kind of guidance in the last few weeks about what we should do, and then takes a swipe at schools that closed. The reason that schools had to close, and it was an anguishing decision, and 54 of the 57 million kids are out of school right now, is that without the tests, you have no idea who is a carrier of COVID-19 and who isn't. And since transmission can happen very easily from a hand to an eye to a mouth to a nose, and it's an invisible virus and you can be very asymptomatic, so it's an invisible virus until you get sick, kids could be carrying it all across from a family to a school, then to another family.
Right.
And so we kept saying, we need the tests, like they had in South Korea, like they had in Japan. And even when they had them in South Korea and in Japan, they still closed the schools to try to create some mitigation. But here in the United States, without having the tests, then essentially in a place like New York, where I live, you probably have about 80% of the people in New York carrying. Now, thankfully, most people are asymptomatic, and thankfully, most people are going to come out of this just fine. But if you're talking about a virus that can hit everybody, or 80%, then 1% of the population is a whole mess of people. Right. It's thousands and thousands of people. So that's why when that the London Imperial 19 study came out, that said 80% of the people could be affected if you do nothing. And that means there could be, even assuming that 1 or 2% was the morbidity rate, that could be 1 to 2 million people dying in the United States. That weekend, that was the weekend right before St. Patrick's Day. That's the weekend that all these governors and mayors got religion. Not Donald Trump, but all these governors and mayors. But then at the same time, because it happened so fast, the Thursday beforehand, we were getting, once the WHO said it was a pandemic, so that was Wednesday, the 13th, the 14th of March, we kept working with school districts around the country and states around the country, because we know it's an anguishing choice. Why? Because we feed 30 million kids a day, because we have homeless kids, because we have kids who are special needs, because we have kids whose parents are essential healthcare providers, right, and they need childcare, and because you have to figure out how to do remote and distance education when we know virtual education doesn't work very well. So all of these things you had essentially around the country, and you had around the country that weekend, literally people building the plane and flying it at the same time. Now, let me say two more things and then I'll shut up. One of the things that we've learned, one of the things that have worked very well is on food, this grab and go. So, there were some districts that, opened up like cafeterias once a day or things like that. But because of the vector of the virus, that doesn't work very well, and because of the social distancing. So we have in lots of different places food, our food people, the lunch folk, the kitchen folk are coming in early in the morning. They're making lunch and breakfast, and parents and others are either picking them up or they're being driven in different places. That seems to be working well. We have rec centers that are open in lots of different places to try to create childcare with some appropriate protective equipment and things like that. We're working hard to try to help our kids with special needs, notwithstanding the contradictory advice and guidance we've gotten from DeVos. And the last thing is on remote learning. The first week was very hard in lots of different places, separate and apart from even whether somebody has a computer or internet. But, a lot of teachers are getting the hang of it and are trying not to kind of substitute what they would have done in class, but some amount of education and engagement each week or each day. Our folks in DC, for example, are working with Fox TV, believe it or not, and once a day they have TV lessons. That's happening in LA as well. And in New York, we have a lot of people who are, doing some online lessons. And then I proposed actually doing something to sum up the year by using what you and I, Pete, knew how to do years ago, term projects or, an end of term book report or tapping the year in a way that shows what kids have been able to do. And so, that's an idea that is starting to gain some resonance as schools now see that they're going to be closed at least for the month of April. How do we help sum up the year? A year, by the way, which 7 months people went to school, but how do we sum this up, particularly for our graduating seniors?
The last question here for you is, states, of course, unlike the federal government, have to balance their budgets. How concerned are you, Randi, that states will take from education to pay for health care? And what, if anything, type of federal or even state legislation are you and AFT asking for?
Well, look, we're very concerned about it. And, and it is a current crisis. Look, we have a broken healthcare system. What this crisis is showing is it's exacerbating all of the inequality. Remember, 40% of people in America couldn't put $400 together in an emergency before this. So we obviously need to deal with the current crisis and save lives. That has to be first and foremost. But kids are our future, and that is one of the reasons we pushed very hard in the relief bill. There's been 3 bills that passed through Congress. I call them COVID 1, 2, and 3. They're all relief bills. They're not stimulus bills. But this last one had over $30 billion for schools specifically, and over $15 billion of that, or $14 billion of that, for K-12 to try to start offsetting the huge amounts of money that are going to be spent by states in terms of healthcare, and the fact that states are losing, all sorts of tax receipts right now because the economy is shut down. So we can't pit our current needs, which are absolutely essential to deal with right now, against our future generations. And we will keep fighting to make sure that we have the budgets that we need in terms of schools. Remember, this has been a 10-year fight against disinvestment. You were with us in Florida, the rally and tally in January, where you had over 15,000 people fighting for that investment. So we will work as hard as we can not to let the future be pit against the present. But obviously, we need to do both right now. We need to make sure we secure our children, and we need to make sure that we fight to keep alive everyone we can keep alive in this crisis.
Randi, I know that you will. Thank you so much for joining me. Keep up the hard work. Keep your hands clean. Stay safe.
Thanks.
Thanks as always for joining me, Randi.
You too, Pete.
All right.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks so much, Peter. Thanks. Bye.
There you go. Nobody better to talk to about teachers than Randi Weingarten. I absolutely love that woman, her passion, her dedication, and her work. Follow her on Twitter at @rweingarten and WFT.org. Everybody, I'm sorry, AFT.org. AFT.org. I don't know what WFT is. It could be a porn site, and I'm not even going to edit this. AFT.org, Randi Weingarten. All right, now let's head down to Florida, where my friend Andrew Spar is the vice president of the Florida Education Association. He's also the secretary-treasurer of the AFL-CIO. They got all kinds of problems in Florida, and Andrew Spar is working each and every day to try to fix them. Here's my conversation with Andrew Spar. All right, I've got my friend Andrew Spar with me now. He is the vice president of the Florida Education Association, and he's the secretary-treasurer of the Florida AFL-CIO, and he is married. He's got 2 daughters, and he and I have known each other a long time. I've done a lot of work with and for his organization. Andrew, thank you very much for joining me. You're down there where you live with your wife and daughters and work in Florida, so I want to start by talking about Florida, your governor, Ron DeSantis, and your parents' retirement community. Can we start? You were just telling me that your parents' retirement community is partying in Florida.
There's at least one party that apparently went on. So my parents have self-isolated for the last 2 weeks or so. My dad has bad asthma, so they didn't want to take any chances. And so my parents heeded the warnings early on. In fact, I've gone to the grocery store for them and brought them groceries. But yeah, apparently one of their neighbors had a party with like 16 people on Saturday night. And unfortunately, a lot of people in that community, I think, get a lot of their news from one source, being Fox News. And so they're not seeming to be too concerned right now.
I would love to interview one of those people that either attended or hosted that party. I mean, I really do want to understand that. Do you want to venture a guess as to why people would be in denial or ignorance? This isn't political necessarily. It's not media driven. I mean, you can say all that, but you know that people are getting sick and dying. And you were telling me literally in that community where this retirement community is, the numbers are very high. How can you ignore that? What do you think that's about?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things, right? I mean, I think it's the mixed messages we've seen from the president, and we've actually seen that mirrored here from our governor as well. So on one hand, they're saying we should take steps and be careful. And then on the other hand, they're saying we want to try to reopen things as quickly as possible, or we're not shutting down beaches, or we're not saying to people, don't get together, take extra steps. It's that mixed messaging, I think, is really driving a lot of that.
But the people are, I mean, there's bodies. Their body back, the numbers. How is that a mixed message? I don't get how you could be, older in a retirement community, more vulnerable, and not just hedge. It explains, by the way, how people feel about climate change and other things. People are literally dying, and they're not even hedging.
Yeah, and Florida in particular has a very large retirement population. They actually just started testing in the Villages, which is a huge retirement community in Central Florida, and a very conservative retirement community in Central Florida. And so we've seen testing there now, and all of a sudden, where they had no cases, they now have cases. And that's been an issue throughout Florida. There's about 18 counties now or 16 counties now that have no cases reported.
Cases of COVID or cases of COVID or STDs? The Villages, I hear about the STDs. That's what I hear
COVID
about.
Right now. We're talking COVID.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Yeah. So, and then also, this governor really well. You've had to work with him and negotiated with him in your role at the FEA and AFL-CIO, Andrew. And so what is your view on his performance given this situation? I mean, the beaches are still open or were still open up at what's the deal? And why has he got it, in my opinion, so wrong?
Listen, he started out taking it seriously, it seemed. But as soon as the president said we want to try to reopen by Easter, it seemed like the governor decided, maybe it's not so bad. Let's keep things open. Let's not close beaches. Really? So some counties, and he even said, how the president has said, we're going to leave it up to the governors. What our governor has done is we're going to leave it up to the counties and the municipalities. So the cities can make decisions, the counties can make decisions. And what happens? You get this hodgepodge thing, and it becomes very political. In counties that are rural, like I said, they haven't really had any cases because they're not testing. And then in the more urban counties, we're seeing some more serious steps be taken, including in Orlando. I mean, look, Disney World shut down before the state of Florida really started acting in terms of what they needed to do. And so that's an issue. And just bring it up that the unions at Disney made sure that the employees were going to get paid. And then other like Universal and others followed suit. But clearly, I think, again, having a voice at work is so important as businesses shut down.
All right, let's talk about teachers and educators at the, national level as well as what's going on in Florida. Nobody knows Florida better than you. You were on a whole bus tour, which I joined you on in November. You went to every nook and cranny, every city, every town, every rural area in Florida to talk to and on behalf of educators. So you understand the challenges, both urban and rural, especially those who are living in deeper poverty, as it relates to what we're calling the digital divide. Explain that issue and how it's affecting people that are living in poverty.
So we've been talking about the digital divide for a while, right? I mean, you have this scenario where there are kids who do not have internet access at home. Maybe their parents have a smartphone, but the kids don't necessarily have access. It's a limited plan. So because of that, kids don't have devices at home. They don't have, iPads or computers. They don't have internet access. So schools have been handing out in Florida, as we move to this digital learning kind of stuff, they've been handing out laptops. They've been handing out iPads, and they're having a challenge trying to make sure all these kids have it. But in some cases, both in urban areas where you have people who live in poverty, they don't have internet access. And so some companies have stepped up and said, okay, we're going to offer free internet, but you still have to sign up for it. There's still some obstacles in that, in getting that internet turned on and getting access to it. And then in rural communities, you literally have places where the internet is not very strong. And so you're talking about using these virtual platforms with videos and stuff like that. And you hear parents talk about how it's taking, at least 50% more time to watch a video than it should. So if you have an hour-long video, it's taking at least an hour and a half because you have poor internet service.
So frustrating.
So that creates a problem.
And so what are the remedies? What are the solutions for those students? You can't leave them out. I mean, you've been working on this issue before the pandemic obviously started. So what are these solutions and remedies for those that don't have the access that they need to the actual computers and internet?
Well, we've been talking a lot about how great our healthcare professionals have been in stepping up, and they have, right? Our healthcare professionals have been awesome in the work that they're doing. And, when you look at the people who are most underappreciated in our country, it is nurses and it is educators. And so now we're seeing the importance of both, right? I mean, we've got nurses who are working these incredible shifts. They're sleeping in hospitals. They're trying to make sure that they keep people alive and care for them. And they're doing amazing things. And so in public education, you're seeing that as well, right? You're seeing teachers and bus drivers and people doing amazing things. We literally have buses going out into rural communities, delivering work packets for people who don't have internet access. They're delivering food for kids who need who have free lunch and need to eat. And this is sometimes the only way they get to eat is at school. So we have those amazing things going on. And so you're seeing teachers calling kids, of course, video conferencing where they can, but calling kids where they don't have internet access, talking to them, getting them packets and doing things. But that's putting a lot of reliance also on the parents in this work.
Yeah, and it's not efficient.
It's not the most efficient way to do it. And of course, you're talking about kids who come from poverty who tend to be behind their peers. Now you're seeing, again, a situation where you have students falling further behind. One of the things that one of our national unions, the American Federation of Teachers, President Randi Weingarten, came out with is that we should really look at capstone projects, giving kids projects that they can do at home with the stuff they've learned already this year. Look, across this nation, although it's really problematic that kids are losing instructional time, most of the time right now has been spent on test prep and testing, which most states have done away with their testing, including here in Florida. We're not testing kids this year. And so we're not actually spending, of these next 9 weeks, we're not going to spend 6 to 8 weeks prepping kids for tests and testing them. So now we have an opportunity to do these project-based learning where kids can literally work on projects with things they know. And that's really one of the best ways. Then it doesn't put an over-reliance on the technology, but it does give kids the ability to show their knowledge and continue their learning. Of course, it does require parents to step up a little bit more, too, in that scenario.
Yeah. What advice do you, by the way, have for parents who are now learning how to be teachers? I'm lucky because the girls, our daughters are 12 and 15. So, I mean, I don't even know what they're doing. I don't really.
But you should still check on them. You should.
Yeah.
We talk about this a lot, and so here's what parents can do.
Yeah,
right?
I don't care right now. Like, it's just week 2. Like, I want to wait till week 3 and see how things are being measured. And in the meantime, I want to teach them things that maybe they're not learning. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm just being lazy, and my kids are 12 and 15. But Go ahead. Sorry.
No, but even with my kids, I've already checked in this morning just before we got on.
Well,
hey,
we've
how's it
established
going?
how much better of a father you are than I am. I mean, it's pretty clear. I'm not even trying to compete anymore.
But what we ask parents to do is do that. We say it all the time, even when they come home from school. Instead of saying to your kids, how was school? You know, with teenagers, if you say, how was your day? What do they say?
Nothing.
Fine.
You have to ask them something much more specific. What happened today during second period with any of your friends? Be very specific.
Yeah, or better yet, say, what did you do in math today? What did you learn? What was exciting? What do you think was boring in math today? What would you like to know more? You know, those are the kinds of questions. Keep asking those questions. Ask the kids to explain to you, to show you what they did today. Even with the digital learning kind of situation, find out, are they having problems? Is the internet an issue? Is the platform? We talk about the internet. The internet so far seems to be doing pretty good as millions of people are now working from home and kids are learning from home, millions more. But what about these platforms? You know, there's only so many platforms out there for kids to interact on with teachers. And are these platforms able to hold up under that as well? So ask them how it's going. Ask them what's happening. My kids are telling me it's slow. It's not working well. There's challenges with it. And so that's important to know. So how can I help as a parent? And that's what you ask your kids. What do you need me to help you with? And so that's a great way to help kids in this scenario.
Yeah, good advice, as always. What about, I know you mentioned earlier before we started taping here, the situation in Florida and some other states, I'm sure as well, is that some teachers, at least, are being mandated to go to the actual building, facility, school, and teach virtually or remotely from there as opposed to in their own homes, which puts them in more danger because they're around other people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
What's
so what
about?
we're seeing here in Florida is it's in the rural communities, smaller communities, where sometimes employees are afraid to challenge the superintendent or others. In those cases in Florida, we have still elected superintendents in some areas. And so there's this mindset that they have to show that teachers are actually working. And instead of trusting them as the professionals and letting them work from home, they're saying, come in and do your video teaching from here, your virtual teaching from the school. And of course, when you have the president of the United States changing his tune yesterday and saying, you know, this could be a long haul, we might not get back to normal. We're talking about 100 to 200,000 deaths potentially here. You know, we should be staying home as much as possible as a society, even here in Florida, where we're actually now starting to see a huge spike in the number of cases, even in our rural communities. And so where we've been stepping in and trying to help is help those communities in negotiating to make sure that, in fact, people are staying home. And it's ridiculous to say, if I can teach from home, I have to come into a school and teach from school. And it's true even with a lot of our other support staff, our secretaries and others. Yeah. Certainly some people have to go in. If we're going to provide food for kids, they're going to have to go in. But you can really limit those number of people significantly.
How are you? That was a big issue, obviously, in New York and school districts all over the country. These sometimes schools, the only place a student gets a meal. How are you managing that? How should schools be managing that? What's the kind of the ethical approach to that? You got to keep it going.
Yeah, again, I think what we're seeing in our schools here, once again, you have educators stepping up in a huge way, and why we count on educators so much in our communities. But what we're seeing is you're seeing, again, being able to keep social distancing, making sure anyone who is ill is able to stay home and not come in. Of course, we don't want people who are not feeling well to prepare food, and yet we want their pay to continue, because a lot of these folks, they only work so many hours a week. They get paid minimum amounts of money. They need to keep that money going. And so, but we're seeing them go in. We're seeing them prepare bag lunches and bag breakfasts. And now what we're seeing is bus drivers and others getting on a bus, taking it out into the community, which makes the most sense, by the way. You know, it's sometimes very challenging for people to get to school. If you take the bus and go into the community, you're more likely to get more kids involved and get them that food. And that's what we're seeing, not just here in Florida, but across the country. And you've seen teachers and others driving around communities to let their kids know, hey, we're still here. And that's, I think, a huge part of why educators are so important. My friend, I won't even reveal where he's texting from. This is, I think, wrong. I know you're going to react to this, but he texted, our school system is using school buses to deliver free lunch to half the population. I guess I'm being a jerk if I start to feel like, hey, how about bringing them groceries and instructions for their parents on how to make a sandwich? Yeah, that's a good question.
That's fair.
But I don't know that it's fair. In some cases, some of those parents are still working. Because, they may be especially in some of our poor communities, they may be people who are working in our grocery stores. And again, how important have they become in this? They may be working at fast food restaurants where drive-thrus are still open. So you do have that element. But the idea of maybe bringing groceries, I think that's probably going to fall into some of the federal guidelines that we have to follow, because these lunches are provided through federal dollars. And of course, there's certain guidelines that they have to follow. But again, the fact that we're doing everything we can to make sure kids are still getting fed who need to be fed, I think, again, that's a testament to the great people who work in our public schools.
All right. Finally, you're also Secretary Treasurer at the AFL-CIO, which is a huge national union with chapters in every state in the country. And so I have seen a lot of upsetting news and heard different stories and rumors about unions and organized labor being attacked during this time of the pandemic. Why do you think that is? What have you heard? And here's the softball question. Why are unions more important now than ever?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is, unfortunately, bottom line tends to drive a lot of decisions. And so, again, even here in Florida, even in our public school system, we've had to step in and in some cases threaten legal action where they've been trying to have people come into school and gather. I mean, literally, we had one school where the principal said, we want everyone to come in and meet in the auditorium. This was at a school with 170 employees. You're going to put 170 people in an auditorium during a pandemic? I mean, it makes no sense. And so we had to step up. And so sometimes I think that's why you get that pushback by people who are making decisions. Our whole thing is just make common sense decisions at this point. Think about it. Be logical in what you're doing. And so you're seeing unions rise up in that area. You're seeing today Instacart, for example, and some from Amazon are saying they're going to go on strike because their health and welfare is not being looked after. Right. And again, this is where unions have been strong. Like I said, Disney right out the gate, because of the fact that the union went to him and said, hey, this is what we need to do. We saw it with GM and Ford workers as well, and Chrysler with the big three, where it was the union who stepped in and said, listen, you've got to take care of your employees first and foremost, not bottom line. That will get taken care of. It was unions who worked with many in Congress to make sure we had better unemployment benefits for people who are being put out of work right now, who may be hourly employees, and so many Americans live paycheck to paycheck. If it wasn't for the unions who were saying, hey, we need to make sure we have good unemployment benefits. We don't need to take care of just the big businesses. Let's take care of the employees. That whole conversation wouldn't have happened without labor and several key lawmakers stepping up to make sure it was working families that are being looked after, not just bottom lines.
All right, buddies. Well, keep up the good work. Thanks very much for talking to me. You are a great educator and a hero to educators, and I so appreciate the work you do and your time today. That is Andrew Spar. Check him out at, what's the Twitter handle for you? I didn't put that on the screen.
Mine is at Andrew Spar, FEA.
At Andrew Spar, FEA. Thank you very much, sir. Support your teachers, and we'll do whatever you say.
Hey, thanks, Pete, and keep doing what you're doing. It's been really valuable, I think, for everyone.
Thanks, pal. Appreciate it.
Take care.
All right, there you go, Andrew Spar, and he is awesome. Love that guy. Really smart, so good at communicating, and it is such a tough spot down in there, Florida, for Florida educators who have been being beaten down for years. But Andrew Spar and Fed Ingram and a whole bunch of people at the Florida Education Association are amazing heroes in public education. And speaking of public education, let's keep it going. Right now, we've got a teacher from Louisiana who teaches in a very low-income parish in Louisiana. She didn't want to give her real name because she was lightly critical of her school district, but she is a listener, or the wife of a longtime listener, Brett, and I'm very happy to have, we'll call her Elizabeth, joining us right now. So now I have a teacher named Elizabeth joining me. That's not a real name because we want to keep things anonymous. She teaches at a public school in Louisiana. And Elizabeth, I'm really happy to have you joining me to talk about the challenges that educators are facing. Thank you very much for doing this.
You're welcome. Nice of you to have me.
Yeah, you teach a really interesting course and type of courses, and you have a fascinating background that has allowed for you to teach. But you teach something called agriculture education, and you teach 9th through 12th graders at this public school in Louisiana. Is that right? At a low-income parish in Louisiana.
Yes, that's correct.
What are the classes that you teach generally and normal times?
So it's a science-based course. So throughout a given school year, I'll teach classes in construction versus carpentry and welding. I also teach animal science and how to raise animals the proper way. And I also teach plant science and leadership.
Leadership, did you say?
Yes, we teach leadership.
That's
courses
great.
as
You
well.
have a greenhouse at your school that you manage, and you've been going in during the pandemic just to manage the greenhouse, make sure the plants don't die?
Yes, I have about 20 different varieties of plants, all ranging from tomato plants to orange trees, strawberry plants.
We're going to have to do a whole nother hour just on that because you can't see because I turned the lights off. But I'm growing all kinds of plants here. I'm an amateur gardener. I'm totally obsessed with it, but I really don't know what I'm doing. So I'm looking forward to your advice on that. But I just think it's real quick. It's fascinating that you have this talent, this information, this education to teach those courses. You teach welding and growing plants and raising animals because when you were growing up there in Louisiana, your dad taught you a lot of this stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, it meant a lot to me. Him and my grandfather. So my grandfather served in World War II, and when he came back, he was a farmer, and he was the first person around our area to grow soybeans. And so the love of the living off the land really meant a lot to me.
And you told
up.
me that your dad would take you hunting. What did you hunt for? And as a little girl, you and your dad went hunting down there in Louisiana for what?
Rabbit and deer and wild hogs.
You
even.
shot hogs. And did you clean them all? Did your dad teach you how to do?
Oh, yes. Everything that we killed, we used.
Fascinating childhood you had in Louisiana. And so you went to college for what?
I went to college for agriculture education because as a high school student, my agriculture teacher really developed me into the person that I am, besides my parents. And I found a love of the curriculum. I love learning about science, and agriculture education was a class that I could use all the other core curricular classes inside of ag. So when math wasn't clicking with me, I could go into the ag shop and build something with my hands, and it would really sink in. And the same thing goes with history class and science and English. And that's what I always wanted to give that to my students because it helped me in high school.
That's really great. I wonder if I can ask just about the obvious gender question. Most people, I think, who study that and teach it are probably men. Is that the case?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So are there not many women that teach agricultural education?
When I first started teaching ag, we had 5 women in the state of Louisiana that taught it. And now we have about 50 or so.
That's so great. So let's talk about your school and the demographic. You teach in a lower income. Is it mostly Black? I think you wrote in the email,
yeah.
African American in your parish. And so the issues there, just low income, are number one, the digital divide, right? They don't always have access to computers and internet. Tell me a little bit about kind of normal times, how you teach and how the kids respond to all these really cool courses that you teach and offer.
So on a normal basis, my class is roughly about 30 students each. I teach 6 classes a day. They're about 50-minute periods. And most of the time, I do my lecturing at the beginning of the week, and then we do hands-on projects the rest of the week. So they know they'll get all the notes at the beginning, and then we'll do like building, or we'll go in the greenhouse and we'll work, or we'll bring in animals, and it's more like interactive class. So it's really difficult in this time period where I don't have that interaction with them anymore.
Like even if all your students had a state-of-the-art laptop and a high-speed connection, it would still be hard to teach welding. I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Like, all right, everybody, masks down, take your torches out, don't light your own homes on fire. No, Michael, don't put it near the drapes. I mean, for you, the challenge is, how are you doing this?
I've changed it to more career readiness than the welding. So, and I'll bring in where they have to interview somebody, or they'll have to watch this documentary online, or they'll have to, when we do carpentry, they'll have to give me the diagram of a project that they want to build and do the planning of it and how much is it going to cost and the safety requirements in it. So that's pretty much how I've revamped it. And as far as the greenhouse, I encourage them to buy a plant, or they could come to my greenhouse and pick up a plant and they'll raise it at home and they'll take pictures of it and do like a digital diary of it. I've done that.
I know part of you remain anonymous allows you to be lightly critical of the district and the situation that you're in. And, I mean, a lot of districts are in this similar situation in that, you drill for fires, you drill for, unfortunately, live shooters. But did you have any preparation for a pandemic or anything else that might cause you to have to teach remotely and virtually like this? Was there any preparation for this in your district?
No. So we've been out for going on 3 weeks now. And the week before we got out, we were having teacher meetings. How do we control the pandemic? Wash your hands. What are things that we need to teach our students in class to watch out for with their cough and their sneeze? And being around that many students in a day, you get a lot of germs anyway.
Sure.
And then we get to Friday. It was a Friday. And actually, the students knew before we did. I heard a student going down the hallway saying that we didn't have to come back to school until April 20th. And, you don't know if they're telling the truth. So, of course, I find out from a more reliable source, yes, that's the case. And this was half the day was over already for our school day. And it was kind of overwhelming. And I felt really depressed because I have a lot of students that go home to some difficult situations. And that's actually what pushed me to get my clinical mental health degree, as well as being an agriculture teacher, because a lot of my students come from homes where they're around drugs and they're around a lot of violence. And so it made me worry more about what's going to happen to them now that we have all this school out versus just my own curriculum.
Yeah, that's really interesting in that you've gotten, or that you're working on this degree. Did you get that yet?
Yeah, I got it in December.
Well, congratulations on that. Oh my gosh, you're so qualified and have so many different talents.
Thank you.
So one of the issues also you were telling me was that your school is not making participation mandatory. How are you teaching and what are you hearing from the students?
So as an agriculture teacher, I never really utilized Google Classroom, but there are a lot of teachers at our school that did use it. So that was our first push. So our principal said, okay, we need to get on Google Classroom. We need to set up everybody and you need to start putting in lessons on that site. Which is difficult for a hands-on class like I have. But, I did it. I switched more to career readiness. Well, then we all went online. We had to contact every one of our students, either by email or by phone, and see if they had internet access or computer access. A lot of mine, didn't. And our school board put out a message on their website that said, well, your work is optional and there will nothing that is going to be graded. And so the work that the teachers are putting out, you necessarily don't have to do it if you don't want to. This is just supplemental work being at home, which
that does not seem helpful for the district
to put us. No.
Well, how much participation then are you seeing from your students during this time?
I have about maybe 10 that are online with me, and they do communicate with me every day. But I teach 130. So
10 out of 130.
Mm-hmm.
And how closely do you communicate and how personally do you communicate with your students in terms of what can you tell us about how they're doing?
Well, on a daily school day, I'm their mom at school. And it's funny to see because I'm a white lady and here's these huge African-American boys and they'll come up and hug me and, mama, they'll call me and I'm worried about them, because right before this happened, 2 of them got shot. 2 of my students were shot and it was on the street, and one of them had surgery and
Well, the problem, you could probably speak to this, but I've talked to a lot of sociologists about this in terms of crime. It often relates, obviously, to poverty, and it's often just about not having a place to be, an activity, and schools and communities where there are boys and girls clubs and after-school stuff. So when school's in session is not generally when crime occurs. When school is out of session, after school during summer, you see a lot more crime. So when this pandemic is forcing students to stay home, I imagine you're going to see crime spiking, where, of course, we're seeing domestic abuse spiking. But I imagine how am I doing? Is that the concern, that when they don't have something to do, they get into trouble? That's when I got into trouble, by the way. I got arrested after school between school ending and lacrosse practice starting. That's when I got arrested for bashing mailboxes because I'm a jackass. But enough about me. That's what you're worried about with your students?
Yeah. And as far as like communication, we can't really communicate with them outside of school, because of district policies. We can only communicate through email service. Oh, right. Yeah.
So even if you wanted to text them or communicate on a more personal level, you're not allowed.
Now, there's been instances around here where other schools have done like small mini parades in the students' subdivisions, and they'll go in their vehicles and they'll wave at them. And I thought that was a good idea, but we haven't yet as a high school.
All right. Well, I'm going to keep in touch with you. I appreciate you sharing all of this with me, Elizabeth, and we'll keep in touch. Keep up the good work. I know it's got to be really challenging during this time. So thank you for what you do on a regular basis, and especially now.
Thank you.
Okay, wasn't that a fascinating woman? Really interesting upbringing and skill set, and I've got a lot to learn from her, especially when it comes to what happens in the greenhouse. Finally, joining me right now is my friend, neighbor, and father of my daughter's good friends down the street, Brendan King. He's a science teacher, a high school science teacher, really smart guy. I love this guy. Great guy. Always finds the best in all of the worst situations, always finds ways to adapt and problems, including this one. Great teacher, dedicated teacher. And I went down the street. You'll hear some references to things you can only see because I also videotaped this. I brought myself 2 microphones, a 15-foot cord on the microphones, and we had a little fun taping this conversation yesterday. Okay, I think this is proper distance between Brendan and I. This is Brendan King. He's one of the very best teachers I know. I know that because the entire community respects him. Everybody knows who he is, number one. And number two, the way he talks about teaching and educating and his students is evidence that he's an awesome teacher. And I'm talking to teachers, and he's right down the street. So, Brendan, you're the science teacher. Do you think this is good enough distance for us?
Yeah, I think it is.
Are you, you just got to, other than disinfecting the microphone, I think we should be good for this.
Yes, just don't sneeze.
Right, no
don't
sneezing.
Cough, yes. The elbow if you have to.
Yes, all right. So you teach where, how long, and what?
I've been teaching for 23 years, North Rockland Central School District, up in the Thiels, Haverstraw area, Haverstraw, Stony Point. And
just north of New York City. You know, I got a national audience, Brent.
National, yes, I forgot about that.
They don't know where Haverstraw is. How long?
23 years.
Science, all sciences.
So, all science. Well, not all sciences. Mainly earth science, astronomy, but I did teach 4 years of life science, 7th grade.
All right, so my first question is, were you prepared for this situation? Was your district prepared for this? Do we do fire drills? We do live shooter drills? Do we do, like, virtual teaching drills? Were you guys ready?
North Rockland Central Schools, the administrators and the lead teachers up there did a great job in preparing us to be ready for any distance learning that we were going to have to do. So they did give us some adequate time in order to prepare for it. And the teachers that I work with, close together with, they also, came together and to set something up, prepare things.
Do all the kids have computers and internet access? I mean, how do you know if your kids are actually connecting with you?
Well, through Google Classroom, which I don't use often, I actually use mainly a website and a calendar to communicate with my students. So I did have to go in to learn some of the nuances with Google Classroom, but it's been pretty good so far. The District 2 was able to put out, I think it was over 600 Chromebooks to students that could not or did not have access to electronics as far as, to be working with a computer. which was very, very big.
So what are you teaching this year?
This year I'm teaching strictly Regents Earth Science.
So ninth grade
Earth Science.
So one of the cool things I've always thought about you as a teacher is you always bring nature into the classroom, or you bring the classroom out into nature. How do you do that now?
Well, ideally being in the classroom, having the students with you is the greatest of all. So looking at where we're at now and what we're doing, we definitely have to, change. We have to make adjustments on the fly. It's similar to playing sports. Sometimes the team that you're playing, they had a game plan. You thought you had a game plan for them. They throw a couple things at you, and you have to change, morph.
You always make it sound easy. You're so good at adapting to situations. But are you doing anything differently? Are you, taking your cameras and going?
Yeah, fortunately, I do have friends that have a lot of great electronics. So I am going to try to go out and do some things where I'll bring the classroom to the students. My whole thing is the outside is my classroom. So for those that are earth science teachers or science teachers as a whole, we need to go outside more often anyway. Sometimes we get, locked in being in the classroom and structuring ourselves that way. So now being that I'm outside all the time, I'm going to try to bring, the classroom to them via GoPros, iPads, my phone, things of that nature.
You always adapt to things, of course, in this situation. Quick, what can you tell me about that rock?
It's a boulder.
Yeah, I could have said that.
25.6 centimeters in diameter and above.
Where did it come from? Is it glacial?
Oh, now you're getting technical. Now, the one thing is, when you do see a rock like that, you really don't know what it is until you actually get inside the rock. A lot of weathering and erosion, weathering taking place, so you really don't know what it is until you crack it open.
Thank you for talking to me. What else would you, what advice do you have for parents who are trying to be teachers and homeschool their kids?
Structure. The principal, the teacher, is my wife. Yeah, she's running the academics.
Right.
I am running phys ed. We flipped the script. My wife is a teacher over in Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow Middle School. So she's been really the one that's been keeping things in check as far as students being at the table. You definitely should have your child working at an area where it's conducive to learning.
How do I know if my daughters are absent?
Absent.
I mean, they're not going anywhere. They're just there all the time. Should I let my daughter
keep your distance? Keep your distance.
Oh, sorry about that. I moved for. Should I let my daughter do her homework on a laptop in bed?
No, I discourage it. A lot of it's like listening to music that you like. You can't do it. Put on something that you don't. Change that background so this way you stay focused on what it is.
All right, Brendan King, awesome teacher. A lot of other teachers out there, we're celebrating you. It's not easy for a lot of people right now, but you're always good at adapting. Thank you for talking to me. Could you just put that microphone down right there and I'll come get it?
And with the disinfectant first.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, that is it. I hope you learned as much as I did from these dedicated teachers, education professionals, and experts. I'll keep bringing the experts on. You'll keep listening. Thank you very much for your paid support, paid subscription. We are now at 500 paid subscribers and counting. Thank you so much for that. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And to take us out here is this viral video that I've seen a few different places. At first, I thought this was David Letterman, this old white guy at a piano with a beard. I want to give you this an attribute and credit. And if I find out where this came from, I will. But I just couldn't figure out where this came from or who this guy is, although he credits the guy who wrote the lyrics. But here's a funny ending song for these crazy times that we're in, and I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up, where I'll welcome Jeff Jarvis. We'll talk about the media, how they are handling things, and more on tomorrow's Stand Up.
Thank you to Chris Franklin for these lyrics. The world has caught a virus, so I've written you a poem. We need your help to cure it, so stay the fuck at home. And if you have got 12 kids or you're living on your own, lock it down and isolate and stay the fuck at home. If you think you're not at risk here, you're living in a dome. It spreads faster than a hooker's leg, so stay the fuck at home. I need the gym, I need the beach, I hear you bitch and moan. You need to grow a brain cell and stay the fuck at home. But I feel fine, I don't feel sick. I'll go out on my own. How thick are you? You you selfish prick. Please just stay the fuck at home. From LA through to Berlin, from Wuhan through to Rome, there's people dying every day, so stay the fuck at home. If you need to contact family, use Facebook, Skype, or phone. We got the fucking internet, so stay the fuck at home. The only way to slow it down is isolate, not roam. Please help the world get back on track and stay the fuck at home. Stay the fuck at home, stay the fuck at home. Don't you be a fucking dick, please stay the fuck at home. Stay the fuck at home.
Stay the fuck at home, everybody, and tell me what you're doing there. Share ideas. We'll talk to you tomorrow.